particular because they are trying to appear like they're coming from a progressive perspective in their opposition to Wall Street reform?
Yes, I absolutely do. It's clever. It's very well done, Rachel. And this is an important point. This is very sophisticated disinformation. I used to work in Russia for a long time, actually. And this is the kind of thing which you saw in Russia and in the Soviet Union. Very, very clever. So they call themselves Stop Too Big to Fail. And my position is exactly the position, for example, of Senator Sherrod Brown and Senator Ted Kaufman today. They unveiled a bill, as you know, on this. Very sensible. Put a size cap and a leverage cap on the biggest banks. Make them smaller as an additional piece of all the other regulatory reforms. So that's my view, and that's the Senator's views on what it would take to greatly reduce the risk associated with these banks that are too big to fail. But this group, calling itself Stop Too Big to Fail, is wrapping itself in some of the same appearances. Of course, when you actually see the TV ad, there's no mistaking. This is an anti-reform ad. This is a kill the bill ad. And we now understand this very clearly, and we will go after them most strenuously, I can assure you.
One of the tensions that happened among progressives on health reform was when the bill got watered down, when the bill became a not very progressive health reform bill, compared to what it could have been. Some people did say kill the bill, and some people said no, stick with the bill and try to strengthen it as much as you can. Is that same sort of split happening among progressives now on Wall Street reform? Do you think there is a credible, not AstroTurf, not corporate front, progressive movement to kill the Dodd bill, kill Wall Street reform because it's not progressive enough?
No, I don't think so. Certainly not yet. That's not what we're seeing. I think everyone we're working with who's legitimate says, look, we'll take what we can get now, and we should try and get as much as we can. And I think the Brown-Kaufman bill and their approach would actually be a stronger message to take to November. It'd be a much better winning proposition. And I have a piece coming out in the New York Times online tomorrow saying exactly that. So we've not given up on strengthening the bill, but I think our broad view is, look, take what you can get this time, and then we'll come back for more. If you think about regulating over-the-counter derivatives, and I know everyone's eyes glaze over as soon as you say that, fine. We'll get what we can take now, and we're going to come back for more, because we're not going to fix it sufficiently, I think, this time. The Dodd bill, though, is an improvement, and it's certainly not at all what the Republicans claim it is.
Simon Johnson, the Ronald A. Kurtz Professor of Entrepreneurship at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and until recently, the accidental, not at all intentional poster boy for an AstroTurf campaign to kill financial reform. Thank you for extricating yourself from these folks and being willing to talk to us about it tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, very quick story. Bear with me. This is Estonia, part of Eastern Europe, roughly the size of New Hampshire and Vermont combined. Estonia became part of the Soviet Union in World War II. They didn't get their independence till the Soviet Union collapsed 50 years later. And by the time Russian troops finally left Estonia in 1994, broadly speaking, Estonians were kind of psyched to see them go. In 2007, Estonia's parliament passed a forbidden structures law, which said anything that marks or celebrates those 50 bad Soviet occupation years is getting torn down. That could have included this giant, hideous, heroic Russian soldier statue that the Soviets left behind in Estonia's capital city. Russia and ethnic Russians who wanted that statue to stay got really mad about the prospect that the statue and other things representing the occupation were going to get torn down. There were riots. Ultimately, the Estonians decided they wouldn't tear down the giant, hideous brass Russian soldier statue. They would just move it out of the city center. Russia was still furious. They love that statue. This means war. Now, if in your mind you're remembering Russian tanks lumbering into Estonia in 2007, your memory is wrong. That's not what happened. That's not what they did. Instead, Russia went to war more like this. Estonia is one of the most wired countries in the world. Even years ago, they already had more mobile phones than people. Every school online. 90% of all bank transactions conducted online. People in the capital city pay their bus fare and their parking tickets by text message. They vote online. There's free internet access for everyone, basically, as a basic right. The country is called Estonia, but you can think of it as Estonia. They're really online. And that's what Russia went after. Or at least what it seems like Russia went after. Distributed denial of service attacks, essentially millions of simultaneous online hits, shut down access to government websites and newspaper websites and other online media, then the telephone networks, the credit card verification systems, banking, even the basic indexing structure of the internet, all tied up in Estonia. And it went on for weeks, essentially a total shutdown. Now, the Russian government said they did not do it. But they said they couldn't rule out the possibility that patriotic individual Russians just did it on their own free time. The Russian government also said they weren't behind a similar but even more crippling attack on internet and IT systems in the nation of Georgia the following year. Even before physical military fighting broke out, Georgians could not get access to information from their own government. They could not read online media. They couldn't call out of the country in some cases or send emails out of the country in some cases to let anybody else in the world know what was going on in that war. That's cyber war. Russians appear to be good at it. So do the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Israelis, lots of countries, maybe even us. Cyber war is such a 1970s-style Tron-sounding word that we associate it with relatively harmless pranking of government websites, like what happened to the Georgian president's website during that war with Russia, or like happened to some U.S. government websites when we think North Koreans came after us last July. It starts to feel like much more than pranking when you think about all the other systems that are potentially vulnerable to attackers who have skills and points of access to take down not just websites, but email systems, banking systems, finance systems, phone systems, cell phone systems, electrical grids, municipal systems. This isn't the first time you've actually thought of this. Did you see the Italian job? Do you remember when they hacked into the stoplights?
They are about to hit a major detour and be sent your way.
We believe that lovable rogues in baseball hats in our heist movies can take down critical infrastructure through hacking. Why do we have such a hard time believing the Chinese intelligence services might do it to us too? Joining us now is Richard Clarke. He was the nation's first special advisor to the president for cybersecurity. He's also the government's former counterterrorism chief. He's now chairman of Good Harbor Consulting. His new book is called Cyber War, The Next Threat to National Security and What to Do About It. Richard Clarke, thank you so much for being here.
I'm delighted to be here.
So I read the book, and I'm sort of obsessed with the concepts in it, as you might be able to tell.
I can see that.
That last 4th of July attack, I remember it as affecting websites of like the FTC, Treasury Department. It was sort of seen mostly as a nuisance. How bad could that have been?
Well, the North Korean attack, and it was a North Korean attack, is interesting because there's nothing for us to attack back in retaliation. They don't have cyberspace very much over there. In fact, they had to launch the attack from China. And from South Korea.
So they have North Korean operatives physically outside of North Korea in places with better internet infrastructures from which they can launch attacks.
Oh, absolutely. They had North Korean army people take over a whole floor of a hotel in China to launch part of this attack. So that's interesting. They can defend themselves because they don't have anything to defend in cyberspace. And even this poor little country can attack us. What they didn't do, they flooded us in various sites. What they didn't do was get inside those sites. But they could, or somebody else could. We know that countries can get inside the control systems for the things you mentioned, the electric power grid. So they turn off the lights? No, they don't just turn off the lights. They cause a generator to explode. That's hard to replace. It keeps the electric power grid down for a long time. They could cause trains to derail. So the United States government has created these military commands, the 10th Fleet, which has no ships, the 24th Air Force, which has no planes, U.S. Cyber Command, to do this sort of thing. China's created military commands, Russia's created military commands. So for me, there are two takeaways here. One, we better defend ourselves, and we're not doing that. Unfortunately, the Obama administration's attitude is, we'll defend the government, the rest of you are on your own. And the other takeaway here is we ought to talk about arms control. We ought to try to get this military under control. We need some civilian oversight of this thing before it happens by accident.
When you talk about our military cyber command, is it offense or defense or both? It sounds
both.
like it's okay.
It's both.
So it's about finding ways to access other countries' vulnerabilities, not accessible through physical warfare, but through computing.
Right.
But it's also trying to protect the United States from similar attacks.
It's trying to protect the Pentagon from similar attacks. It doesn't have the authority and it doesn't have the capability to defend you and me, to defend the banking system, to defend the power grid, trains, pipelines. No one's doing that. The government's policy is you defend yourself. It's as though in the Cold War, when the Russians had bombers that could come bomb us, it's as though the government said to U.S. Steel in Pittsburgh, you know, the Russians have bombers. You better get some air defense systems to protect yourself from them.
Right. Because we don't want to interfere with your private industry.
Right. It goes back to ideology, and it goes back to the dislike in Washington to regulation. I mean, the only way the government's going to be able to defend our cyberspace is to have more regulation. That regulation in Washington is a dirty word. But if we don't have some targeted regulation, we're not going to be able to defend ourselves against North Korea or Iran. If we do sanctions on Iran over their nuclear program and they choose to retaliate